Okay, so for this discussion, let's have first a game. So this game is called Word Scramble. We're going to scramble the words and comment down your answers in the comment box because we will give a corresponding score for that. Okay, so next, next, for this um, let's have a trial. So there is a jumbled word and there are some clues provided for you. So there are letters that are being provided. So the answer for that would be okay. So whole. Okay, very good. Okay, now let's start our final or actual na game. Okay, next. Okay. Can
Okay, this is athletic. Now let's proceed to what's this jumble word. We have clear answers. Rubric. Yes, the correct answer is rubric. Next slide, please. Okay, now we will present to you our pre-recorded discussion about analytic rubric and holistic rubric.
Analytic rubric versus holistic rubric. Learning objectives. At the end of the lesson, the students will be able to describe what are analytic rubric and holistic rubric, identify the advantages and disadvantages of analytic rubric and holistic rubric, and differentiate analytic rubric and holistic rubric.
Hello everyone, good day. I am Kyle Christian Di Malesa and I am together with Miss Mariel Kailing and we are going to discuss about analytic rubric and holistic rubric. We, as future educators, as soon as we begin to teach, very shortly after that we begin to think about what we need to do in order for us to assess or to test our future students, and as soon as we have them doing any kind of writing or any kind of speaking activity, we need to think about how we are going to grade those tasks or activities in a consistent way across multiple students. At that point, we probably need to start thinking about how or what kind of rubric to use and how to create a rubric, and that is what we want to speak or to discuss to everyone right now. Before we will dig deeper about the concepts of analytic rubric and holistic rubric, let us all first learn what is a rubric. So we have here A rubric is a grade for assessment of real-world tasks. So what are those real-world tasks? So here we have writing reports, making presentations, designing experiments, demonstrating professional skills, and solving problems. The second definition of a rubric is it is a learning assessment tools. So why it is a learning tool or learning assessment tool? It is a learning tool because it is used to evaluate written outputs, projects, and performance-based tasks of the students. Therefore, rubrics are used by teachers to effectively quantify the performances shown and delivered by the students. So third definition of a rubric is that it helps teachers in grading the output of the students. So why it is so? It is because the rubrics will serve as the guide on how the teachers will rate the students' output, and it can also save time for teachers as well in grading. We have here the fourth definition of a rubric, in which it is a guidelines that clearly identify how a learning activity will be assessed. Rubrics also lay out the expectations for this student regarding what an instructor is looking for from an assignment. A well-designed grading rubric is typically developed in alignment with a set of learning objectives or competencies for a particular course or a particular program. The rubric makes easier for students to understand how to approach an assignment, and it will also make it easier for instructors to assess an assignment in a fair manner. Rubrics can also help instructors to grade more quickly. A rubric is an assessment tool that clearly indicates achievement criteria across all the components of any kind of student work, from written to oral to visual. It can be used for marking assignments, class participation, or overall grades. There are two types of rubrics, which are the analytic rubric and the holistic rubric. So we have here the importance of a rubric. First, a clear alignment with objectives. Rubrics should be designed to align with the learning objectives that a teacher set out for their course. Aligning the rubrics with the objectives ensures that the teachers or the teacher is assessing students on whether or not they are able to achieve those stated learning objectives. X is it demonstrates effectiveness of the teacher's instruction. This also helps students to understand what they need to improve upon or review in order to successfully meet the outlined learning objectives for the course. Rubrics also help to maintain consistency across teachers' grading of all their students. Rubrics help the instructor to focus on the main objectives of the assignment and make sure that each student is meeting them. Measuring each student's performance in relation to the rubric ensures that all students are assessed in the same manner. So third is it explains expectations to students. Rubrics help to support the grades that the teachers give to their students on their assignment by providing the why behind the grades. Providing rubrics up for the students also has the benefit of providing them with a detailed look at what you are requiring in the assignment. This often helps students to provide better work and keep them from getting distracted by issues that are not pertinent to the task at hand. Providing these expectations is particularly useful in the environment where students do not have the advantage of a classroom stream where they can ask their questions about assignments face to face to their instructors. Lastly, it facilitates grading. Rubrics help instructors to save time in grading, both short-term and long-term, and this gives teacher a timely and effective feedback and promotes student learning in a sustainable way. Now, we have here a question, why do teachers like rubrics? As what I have observed, teachers often really like to use rubrics for a variety of reasons. One is when teachers are looking at extended responses made by their students. It is actually very practical to have a rubric because it makes scoring a little bit easier for students. It ensures that teachers' scoring is consistent or reliable across multiple students. It does provide sometimes some type of feedback to students, usually because students are able to look the descriptions of efficiency level and get an idea of their strengths and weaknesses. And so it enhances its way to provide accountability to their students because they are really providing them with as much feedback as we can. So, teachers generally like to use rubrics, often though teachers have a love hate relationship with the rubrics. They like to use rubrics, but perhaps not this one, or they can find problems with a particular rubric. And so, when your teachers start to develop or thinking about using their own rubric, as I have observed, teachers don't ever think that their rubric is absolutely completely finished. Teachers may want to tweak it as they go along after each use to make it and improve it and make it a little bit better and better. But generally, teachers really like rubrics. But what about students? Do you think students really like rubrics? So again, teachers like rubrics because it is very practical. It makes scoring easier. It ensures scoring reliability across multiple students. And lastly, it provides feedback and accountability to students. So why do students like rubrics? Do you think students really like rubrics? The answer to that question is usually yes. Students do like rubrics because again, they can be able to see the criteria for their success, their strengths, and weaknesses. They usually provide quite a bit of feedback to students. Often students are more engaged and motivated when they know the criteria upon which teachers are basing their evaluations, and it can be motivational for students. And it can, if they have worked with a rubric, the teachers has been using the rubric before and they are familiar with it. It can provide them with a real sense of stability across multiple assignments. So that's it. We students usually like rubric too. There are two types of rubrics that teachers frequently use when they evaluate students' speaking or writing activities, and we are going to discuss this now. The two types of rubrics are the analytic rubric and holistic rubric, and each types of rubrics have their own strengths and weaknesses that teachers, especially we future educators, should be aware of. Let us talk first about analytic rubric. So what is an analytic rubric? An analytic rubric is used for formative assessment. It is the articulate levels of performance for each criterion so the teachers can assess students' performance for each criterion. Meaning, a teacher could assess student if the student has did an satisfactory, unsatisfactory, and very satisfactory job, and that also allows teachers to assess students' achievement in multiple criteria using a single break. It also breaks down the characteristics of an assignment into parts, allowing the teacher to itemize and define exactly what aspects are strong and which one needs improvement. There are things to be considered in designing an analytic rubric. First is to determine the purpose of the rubrics by defining your purpose of having this kind of rubric and think about the goal of the rubric. Another is to write the task or assignment description. Next is to identify the performance criteria by considering questions like why are we giving students this assignment? And what are the learning outcomes or learning goals? Next is to develop a rating scale by designing the rating or scoring scale for all criteria in the rubrics and giving each rating a name instead of just a number. Another is to describe the performance level for each criteria by making sure that all criteria can be observed and measured when evaluating the submission of the student's activity. Lastly, it ensures that the rubrics is of second quality by testing the rubric and getting peer feedback. Analytic rubrics have advantages and disadvantages. So let's talk about the advantages first. One of the most important advantages of an analytic rubric is that it provides very specific feedback to students so that they can clearly see whether they have strengths on content or weaknesses and organization, strengths on vocabulary range or weakness on spelling or punctuation, and this is really important feedback for students to get. So in that, it is very helpful to the student. The other thing a teacher can do with an analytic rubric is because the sub-skills are broken out. The teacher can actually weight the sub-skills according to how important they think those are. And this is an option that's not available to teachers when they use a holistic rubric. So, for example, let's say a certain teacher teaching a grammar course where he or she asks students to write quite a bit in their assignment, I mean assessment of the writing. A teacher may use a rubric, but it would be completely understandable if he or she weighted the grammar component of the particular task more heavily rather than on content and organization, because that would match very closely with what the teacher had been teaching students. That would make sense. Conversely, if the teacher had an essay writing kind of course where the teacher were focusing mostly on the different rhetorical patterns, he or she might choose to emphasize the content and organization and de-emphasize the grammar or accuracy part. The teacher may or may not, but he or she have that option when he or she is using an analytic rubric. Another advantage of an analytic rubric is that it produces more reliable sources, more reliable scores than a holistic one, particularly across multiple scores, but also possibly just for the teachers on scoring purposes because he or she is assessing each sub-skills individually. The teacher is able to make a judgment on one particular sub-skills before the teacher move on the next particular sub-skill so that the teacher can evaluate content separately from organization and separately from accuracy. Another advantage of analytic rubrics is that, for example, a teacher is using them for research purposes. The analytic rubric can give a really good picture to the researcher of the strengths and weaknesses of his or her students. That sort of an unusual circumstance, but if the teacher is involved in a research project, it's really a good idea probably to use an analytic rubric. If there are advantages, of course, there are disadvantages to analytic rubrics as well. And one of the bigger advantages is that it takes a longer time to score because a teacher is weighing or judging each sub-skill separately. That may take a little bit of time. A little bit more time than it does if a teacher is using a holistic rubric. Teachers may also find that analytic rubrics are harder to develop if they have to build an analytic rubric by their own self is probably a little bit more challenging because they have to write more descriptors for analytic rubrics than for a holistic rubrics. And when a teacher is writing a descriptors, he or she may have a challenging time avoiding overlap between one descriptor and another and ambiguity. So that is always a challenge when a teacher is writing or creating an analytic rubric. Another challenge with an analytic rubric is that it may not allow teachers to assess the overall effect of an output. And by this, I mean that a teacher may actually have a student who produces or writing text that is fairly weak in terms of grammar. The accuracy is quite poor, than making lots of mistakes. And yet, overall, the teacher will really appreciate what they have done or they've created a text that is creative. That is really interesting. It may not have superior content, but perhaps somehow it is very appealing due to its rhythmic quality or almost poetic lines, perhaps that the students has used. And so, if a teacher is very analytic with a rubric, or if the teacher have an analytic rubric, and he or she becomes very analytic when he or she looks at pieces of writing, like that a teacher may not actually be able to capture the overall effect with an analytic rubric.
So this is an example of an analytic rubric in which it has five parts, which are the title, description, scale and scoring, performance descriptor, and lastly, criteria.
So now let us sum up the concepts or the difference between analytic rubric and holistic rubric.
So here we have two types of rubric. When we say holistic rubric, it does not list separate levels of performance for each criterion, while analytic rubric, it articulates levels of performance for each criterion. In holistic rubric, it provides a single overall score but does not communicate information about what learners are to improve, while in analytic rubric, it gives diagnostic information to the teacher and informative feedback to learners. In holistic rubric, it emphasizes the relation between parts and wholes, while in analytic rubric, whole output broken up or separated in parts and scored accordingly. Another one, in a holistic rubric, it assesses learners' work as a whole using a criteria, while in analytic rubric, it assesses components of a finished product. So lastly, for a holistic rubric, it is limited to describe the whole output based on analysis of parts.
So good day everyone. I am Mariel Pica Eileen, your reporter for today about holistic rubric. So in this discussion, we will be tackling what is holistic rubric, what are its advantages and disadvantages, when to use it, and what's the difference between holistic and analytic rubrics. Okay, so let's start. So what comes into your mind when you hear the word holistic? According to Merriam-Webster, holistic is related to or concerned with wholes or with complete systems. So what it means is that we will deal with or take into account the whole of something, not just a part. Now, how about holistic rubric? Or what is holistic rubric? A holistic rubric assigns a level of performance by assessing performance across multiple criteria as a whole indicated by one single score. So, in one single score, multiple criteria of the performance are covered. Holistic rubric does not list separate levels of performance for each criterion. You just look into the performance and you give one holistic score to that whole performance. Another is a holistic rubric is the most general kind. It lists 3 to 5 levels of performance along with a broad description of the characteristics that define each level. The levels can be labeled with numbers such as 1 to 4, letters such as A to F, or words such as beginning to exemplary. So in other words, for each level of performance, all the criteria that need to be evaluated are identified together. For instance, with a scale of 1 to 4, level 4 may contain correct grammar, proper organization of ideas, etc. It was termed as broad because one level covers multiple criteria. What each level is called isn't what makes the rubric holistic. It's the way the characteristics are all lumped together. In holistic rubric, descriptions of each attainable level of performance are written in paragraphs and usually in full sentences. Let me show you an example of holistic rubric. In this rubric, we have three levels which are strong performance, satisfactory performance, and needs improvement. Now, we can see that descriptions of each level are written in paragraphs. Aside from that, one level covers multiple criteria. For instance, the level strong performance covers clear focus, accuracy of information, smooth transitions, and correct grammars. Kumbaga, usara score nila. Not like in analytic rubric where lahi-lahi ang score sa focus, sa grammar, transitions, etc. which allows you to specify precisely which criteria or aspects of a performance are strong and which ones needs development. So what are the advantages and disadvantages of holistic rubric? So for the advantages, first is quick scoring or time saving. So using holistic rubric saves time as it minimizes the number of decisions raters make. Dili na kaayo puti kung mag-score ta. That's why holistic rubric tends to get used when a quick judgment needs to be made. So, when assessing a brief homework assignment, it may be sufficient to use a holistic rubric to quickly review student work. Next is, it is good for summative assessment. Diba summative assessments are typically done at the end of a project, unit, course, semester program, or school year. So, this type of rubric is good for summative assessment as it gives an overall judgment of performance. Next advantage is the emphasis on what the learner is able to demonstrate rather than what he or she cannot do. Because scoring is regarded as general, the performance score places more emphasis on how well a student performed a task than on how poorly they performed it. Next is they are often written generically and can be used with many tasks. Holistic rubrics are written generically as they contain broad descriptions and list evaluation scores, each with an overall criterion summary that encompasses multiple skills. Next advantage is trained raters tend to apply them consistently, resulting in a more reliable measurement. Tungod kay di na kaayo puti, so sayo na kaayo kung mag-score sa usa ka performance. That's why there is consistency which would result, of course, to a reliable measurement. So, let's move on to disadvantages. So one disadvantage is it does not provide detailed information, may be difficult to provide one overall score. So it's difficult to provide one overall score kay mag-estimate pa ka kung unsay angay score ana nga particular performance. Next is do not provide specific feedback about strengths or areas to improve. Yeah, because in your whole performance, only one single score is provided. That's why dili ta makahibaw kung what specific criteria ta nabidya kay i-generalize naman ang pag-score. Next is not useful for formative assessment because they lack specific details. So another is, when student work is at varying levels spanning the criteria points, it can be difficult to select the single best description. And the next is, criteria cannot be weighted. It cannot be weighted because the score is for general or gitibo na. We don't know if out of those 20 points, nga nahatag 5 adto para sa presentation or 5 adto sa organization, etc. So, when to use a holistic rubric? So, holistic rubrics are best to use when there is no single correct answer or response, and the focus is on overall quality, proficiency, or understanding of a specific content or skills. And it is convenient to use holistic rubric when assessing minor assignments or performances. So, what's the difference between analytic and holistic rubric? Analytic rubrics identify and assess components of a finished product, while holistic rubrics assess student work as a whole. So remember the words component and whole. So for the summary, holistic rubrics contain broad descriptions and list evaluation scores, each with an overall criterion summary that encompasses multiple skills. This type of rubric are quicker to develop and learn, quicker to score, and quicker to find agreement among various evaluators than analytical rubrics or analytic rubrics. Because they produce a single score, they are most effective when the elements being assessed are closely related. However, they do not give as much feedback to students, and so they are more difficult to use as a learning tool than analytic rubrics. So that's all for my discussion, and I hope you learned from that, and thank you for listening.
Okay. Na may klase after class. Hello, madungo ko.
Yes, ma'am. Madunggan ka, ma'am.
Na may klase after.